Thanks so much, Simon, for the welcome. Happy New Year, everybody. As Simon said, I'm Anne-Marie Friel. I'm a partner at global law firm Pinsent Masons. My own involvement in the DT Hub is twofold. I'm currently a member of the DT Hub Advisory Board, and I've also been co-leading the Governance and Trust Working Group with my most excellent Pinsent Masons colleague, Sarah Cameron, who's also attending the call today. And it's a real pleasure to be here and to share an update on the work of the DT Hub Governance and Trust Working Group. So I'm just going to cover 4 things very quickly. First, I'll talk a little bit about the working group itself. Second, I'll look at why governance and trust is so important at an organizational level to connected digital twins. Third, I'll very quickly take you through the work we did in 2023. And then I'll finish by just sharing what we'd like to do next. So starting first with the working group, should have that up there. We met for the first time in January 2023, and a really big shout out to the working group members. There's actually at least 3 of them on the attendees that I could see. They've proved to be a very strong volunteer army, all very committed to moving things forward. This selection of names were the people who were involved in the report that I'm quickly going to take you through, and a really great diverse range of participants. And the working group was formed to fill a perceived gap, and I'll just quickly explain what that gap is. As you've just seen from the excellent presentation from Jonathan and Ali, there's a massive amount of technical work that has been done and is being done in demonstrating the benefits that connected digital twins can provide and really proving the concept. However, I do think there's still a gap in understanding how to enable business to move in support of connected digital trends, and in particular, how to support, I'm going to call it the behavioural economics and the organisational operating models which are needed to support connected digital twins in practice. So just moving on to the second point and looking at why organisational support is needed for a connected digital twin. Some really good work has been done in recent years on helping organisations develop business cases for the use of digital twins within a single organisation. That's really helpful as more progress is still needed there. But connected digital twins are a bit different in that they span multiple organisations. This inherently collaborative nature of a connected digital twin and the sort of novel aspect to it makes it particularly complicated to deliver. And why do I say this? I'll just quickly look at 4 things. First of all, connected digital twins are by their nature what I'm going to call a collaborative enterprise. Participants likely to be a mix of organisations, likely to be a mix of public and private sector. All of these organisations are going to be coming from different markets, have different cultures, different perspectives, different concerns. And collaboration is one of these things, it's really easy to talk about. It's actually quite difficult to achieve in reality. Second, this collaborative enterprise, which I've talked about, of a digital twin, it's underpinned by data sharing across the participating organisations, as you all know. Data sharing, for the most part, involves a choice. And this applies to all data sharing. I mean, the way I think about whether or not to share my birthday on social media actually applies equally to the way that organisations might think about sharing data for the purposes of a digital twin. In both cases, we want to understand both the benefits and we want to understand the risks before we make our decision. Third, a connected digital twin project is not going to happen by itself. It needs an operating model for development, delivery, and operation of the project. Generally speaking, this isn't going to be free, so it's going to need funding, and that means it needs a viable business case to be in place. Lastly, for this particular purpose, connected digital twins are new, so there isn't really a status quo. And that means there's a lack of understanding on how and why. Most organisations are inherently cautious about doing new things. They need to understand the purpose, the value and the benefit of doing things new. They need to understand how any risks are going to be managed. So with all of this in mind, the role of this working group has been to look at how connected digital twin projects are best set up, structured and operated by organisations. And what we're trying to ensure is this collaborative data sharing enterprise can sort of flourish. We do this through really good organisational governance. Notice I'm not talking about technical governance, I'm talking about organisational governance. Organisational governance supports trust and participation in this enterprise. So looking thirdly at what we've been doing in 2023. When the working group kicked off last year, we really wanted to get something concrete in place to help us fill the DT Hub objectives of wanting to produce guidance for the community and for industry. The working group members were all really aligned in wanting to move from talking to action. So last year, we all put a lot of work collectively into producing this very short paper, which I'm pleased to say is now available for download from the DT Hub website. So big plug there. The website's great. Go to the resources section and to the download section. The focus of the paper is based on the premise that to be successful, a connected digital twin needs to be structured as a purpose-driven, value-creating collaborative enterprise. And this needs these three sort of foundational aspects of trust, purpose, and value to be understood by participants, because these are the things that are going to drive and going to incentivize the behavior needed to get people behind a project. And they're going to make the difference between a successful project and one that fails. As you can see from this slide, which is summarizing the paper, each of these three elements is multi-layered issue. It breaks down into different components, there's crossover and there's nuance to each of them, but these principles form the foundation of a project. You could say they're the golden threads that run throughout the life of the project. But we need to do a bit more to bring it all together. That's not going to be enough by itself. So just got three things there on the slide. First one, setting up the operating model. Secondly, design this organizational governance between the participants that will support trust and participation. Thirdly, set up the legal framework. I'm a lawyer, this is where I come in as well, including all the data sharing elements. But keep in mind these core principles of trust, purpose, and value. If we keep these in mind, we're going to ensure that when we do all of these practical steps, we design them in the right way and we don't cut across what's really important to participants. So this is a summary, but as mentioned, the full report's available for download on the Hub. I really encourage you to look at it. So finally, just finishing up on what's next. Well, the ambition of the working group is to move to something with even more granularity, more actionability. What we'd like to produce is a code of practice, which is more detailed how-to guide, aimed at a really broad audience, kind of a set of principles and practices to guide users from procurement through to delivery. It would be a significant piece of work. There's generally a lot of consensus that it will fill a gap, but it's going to take a large commitment by two of our most experienced working group members. That's Hayden Sutherland, who's on the call, and also Chris Ford from University of Lancaster. We don't yet have certainty on when this will be able to be commenced. However, it's certainly the aim for this year, and I think Justin and the DT Hub will keep you posted on what progress we make with that. Hope that was a helpful update on the working group activities. Looking forward to the Q&A. Back to you, Simon.
The next question is for yourself, Anne-Marie. Is nice to hear the collaborative collective enterprise as a term. Can you provide some concrete examples from the real world that could just be described as such?
Good question. Well, in the world of infrastructure, we do, which is actually my background, we do a huge amount of collaborating. Actually, we probably lead. We do alliances. Let me just think. We've got Smart Motorways Alliance. We have water alliances. We have different alliances. There's also really brilliant ones as well from the DT Hub, such as Credo. We now have the Isle of Wight. These are the kind of emerging things in the actual digital twin. So what we need to do is we need to take some of the good collaborative principles that we've learned over the years of where we've set up successful collaborative enterprises, and we need to shift that learning into the world of connected digital twins, because actually the principles of collaboration are the same, whether you're sort of building a motorway or whether you're doing a connected digital twin. The behavioural economics work the same way.
So our next question is probably to all of our speakers, actually. Who should own infrastructure underlying connected digital twins? So, Anne-Marie, maybe you've got a thought on that first, and Jonathan, Ali, if you've got views as well.
I don't think there's a personal view. There won't be a one size fits all on the right. I would say this is part and parcel of the operating model. I don't think there's a one size fits all on this. I think it will depend on the specific characteristics of the project. That's my particular view, but I'm sure Ellie and Jonathan may have different views.
No, completely agree. And I think to give examples of that, if you are the Boeing and Airbuses of the world, you may own your own infrastructure and mandate that as part of the supply chain, you use our infrastructure. Whereas somebody else, if you're in a more collaborative environment, you might not trust any individual party to also be part of the party and also own the infrastructure. So then you need somebody independent to host the environment to establish that data sharing infrastructure. So completely agree. Very much fit for purpose and very much fit for the use case you're trying to do. Alec?
Well, so more agreement, unsurprisingly, considering all of our backgrounds. But I think that when we look at the models, what we've seen in the past is that kind of centralized ownership for Airbus or so on through things like Skywise and so on works really well right up until their supply chain bumps into someone else's supply chain, at which point you have two big dogs in a fight. So the truth is the fundamental infrastructure should be owned by those people that own the pieces of it. So they may choose a third party to do it on their behalf. But actually, that's the point of the decentralized federated common working environment and why these principles around trust frameworks are so important. I think if we look elsewhere across the community, the National Grid ESO virtual energy system, for example, is absolutely explicit that we need a national virtual energy system. They don't want to own it. They want a selection of different people to own it and be able to interoperate in a decentralized way through a trust framework that they may set some of the rules for based on some of the principles that Sarah and Anna Marie and others are working on. But fundamentally, the actual ownership, we should increasingly take ownership of our own pieces, even if our choice is ultimately, to Jonathan's point, to say to a third party, I am comfortable in this example that will use your secure cloud or common working environment or whatever else. But fundamentally, I think everything we're doing, if at some point someone says, oh yes, and Jeff will own it all, we're doomed to failure.
Good, thank you all. Next question here is, where does management of risk feature in the trust and governance framework?
Well, that goes into both the what I was calling the organizational governance, but also the data sharing agreements. What's really important there's a myriad of, I don't want to say, of issues and complexity around data, and it's a much too big a topic to answer in probably the minute I've got to answer this question. But the data sharing agreements are one way that people try to assure themselves of how these risks are going to be managed. I think what's really important, perhaps what's been missing, is ensuring that when we're doing those agreements, we're not cutting across this underlying kind of purpose and benefits that we're all working collectively towards. That risk, management of risk, that's kind of classic legal agreement stuff that we deal with.
Brilliant, thank you. And potentially our last question, how do these proposed DT features relate to and build on the Gemini principles?
Well, yeah, I'll take that one. Well, we're building directly, and if you download the paper, you'll see that we're absolutely in sync, I believe, with the Gemini principles. I see a comment from Mark Enzer there. We're trying to build on the Gemini papers. We're trying to take it to a more practical level. First piece of work we did was really very much a summary, and we're hoping that the code of practice idea, if and when we're able to commence that, we'll develop it to a much more granular level.
Very good. And our final question actually is the DT working group promoting a data sharing agreement document?
We hope in time, but I think you shouldn't start with the data sharing agreement. You need to start with the structure and setup of the enterprise, of which the data sharing agreement is but a tool to deliver the enterprise. It is nothing more. Starting with the data sharing agreement is akin, for all you technology folk, of starting with the technology solution without defining the problem. That would be my lawyer's view on it.
Very good. And maybe one more question is, do you have case studies which show tangible benefits from the trust working group? So where trust frameworks, etc., have been done before elsewhere?
Oh, I'm loving all these questions. We are working on things. Remember, we are a volunteer army of largely private sector organisations, of which we've all got our own things going on, and we are all trying to apply the principles. My own view is that the next 12 months will be really interesting, and we very much hope we'll start to get some case studies in place. We've got plenty of examples of data trusts. We're working on the Stream project with a bunch of water operating companies. There's the National Digital Twin program, which is fascinating. There's a lot going on. So I think watch this space for published case studies, I hope, in the short to medium term.
Very good. And Ali, your hand there, maybe to add something else?
Yeah, I was just going to add, and I'm sure it will come out as Anna-Marie says, but one of the things I think we need to bear in mind when we talk about case studies is there are the case studies and the value, but there's also the question that I think if we look at the stuff that Jonathan, the MRC team is doing, how else would you do it? So if the value is either something exists or it doesn't exist, then I'd ask people to look at how else would you do a federated infrastructure for energy transition, if not with trust frameworks and so on. So the value of doing it is the thing that you want to do can be achieved, because traditional data sharing contracts are not going to get it done.